The sun had barely risen when Daniel Curtis stepped out of his small rented room with his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, holding his hand. The morning air was cold, but not colder than the life he had been battling every day. Daniel was a single dad, working 2 part-time jobs, doing everything he could to provide a better life for his little girl. Lily looked up at him with sleepy eyes. "Daddy, will you pick me up early today?" Daniel forced a smile. "I'll try, Princess. Daddy just needs to finish a little extra work today." Inside, Daniel knew he was lying not because he wanted to, but because life never gave him the chance to be the father he wished he could be. Bills were piling up. Rent was late, and the only job interview he had been hoping for got cancelled last night. He was exhausted, but he never let Lily see that pain. After dropping her at school, Daniel hurried toward the city center. Today was important. He had heard that Alexander Stone, one of the richest businessmen in the country, was hosting a hiring event in front of the Stone Industries building. Daniel didn't care about the position janitor, assistant, anything. He just needed a stable income. Daniel swallowed nervously and approached him. Alexander's eyes scanned him from head to torn-out shoes, cheap shirt, tired face, but gentle eyes. "You're here for the job?" Alexander asked, his voice low and firm. Daniel nodded. "Yes, sir." "I'll do anything. I just need a chance." Alexander looked at him for a long moment and then said something strange, something that would become the beginning of a life-changing test. "If you truly want this job, give me your last $10. Right now." Without asking why, Daniel froze. $10. That was all the money he had left for the day, for food, for Lily's snacks, for the bus ride back home. Daniel's heart pounded. Was this man insulting him? Testing him, or simply mocking the poor? Why? "Why do you want it?" Daniel asked softly, unable to stop himself. Alexander raised an eyebrow. "I said no questions." Daniel lowered his head. This was humiliating. But if this billionaire was really offering a job, maybe this was part of the process. Maybe he wanted to see obedience, or trust. Daniel didn't know. His hands trembled as he reached into his pocket and pulled out the crumpled $10 bill. He stared at it for a moment. That little piece of paper meant survival, but his daughter's future meant more. He stepped forward and handed it to Alexander. Alexander took the money without any expression or smile. No reaction. He simply slipped it into his coat pocket. "Interesting," he said. Daniel felt his heart tightening. Had he just made a mistake? Will he now walk home hungry? Will Lily ask for food he couldn't afford? Alexander pointed to a bench on the sidewalk. "Sit there," he ordered. Daniel obeyed quietly. For the next hour, Alexander kept watching him, as if studying his every move, his posture, his silence, his patience. People walking by whispered again. "What's going on? Why is that poor guy sitting there alone? Is the billionaire still testing him?" Daniel ignored them all. He waited and waited, even though he didn't know what he was waiting for. Finally, Alexander walked up to him again. "Get ready," he said. "Your real test starts now." Daniel felt a chill in his chest. He didn't know. This test would change his entire life. Daniel stood up slowly, confused but alert, as Alexander Stone fixed his tie and glanced at his watch. People were still staring, curious about the unusual scene of a billionaire interacting with a poor single father. "Follow me," Alexander said without looking back. Daniel hesitated, but obeyed. He had already sacrificed his last $10 turning back, now would mean that sacrifice was pointless. They walked down the busy sidewalk until Alexander suddenly stopped beside a small cafe. Inside, warm lights glowed, and people chatted happily over breakfast. Daniel hadn't eaten since last night, and the smell of fresh bread made his stomach growl quietly. He hoped Alexander didn't notice. "Wait here," Alexander said, and went inside the cafe. Through the glass, Daniel watched him talk to a waiter. They exchanged a few words, and then Alexander pointed toward the street toward Daniel. The waiter nodded with a confused expression. A moment later, Alexander came out, holding nothing. "Here's your task," he said. "Step inside the cafe and ask for the meal that has already been paid for." Daniel blinked. "You bought me food." Alexander's expression didn't change. "Just go inside. But there's a condition." Daniel tensed. "What condition?" Alexander leaned slightly forward and said in a low voice, "You must refuse to sit down, unless they let a homeless man eat with you." Daniel stared at him, shocked. "A homeless man." Alexander pointed toward the far corner of the sidewalk. There, under an old torn blanket, sat an elderly homeless man with tired eyes and a trembling body. People were walking past him like he didn't exist. Daniel's heart softened instantly. "But why?" he whispered. "For the job." Alexander's voice was flat. "And remember, you don't get to ask questions." Daniel took a deep breath. He understood. This was not a test of obedience. It was a test of heart. He walked toward the homeless man first. The poor old man looked up weakly. "Sir, do you have a coin? Anything?" Daniel knelt beside him. "Would you like to have breakfast with me?" The man blinked rapidly, confused and emotional. "Me? They don't let people like me inside." "Then they won't get my money," Daniel said softly. "Please come." Slowly, the old man stood up. His clothes were dirty, and his hands were shaking, but his eyes were grateful. Daniel placed a steadying hand on his shoulder and guided him inside the cafe. The moment they stepped in, whispers started. "Why did he bring a homeless person here? This isn't a shelter. They'll cause trouble." Daniel ignored them. A waiter approached. "Sir, your meal is paid for, but we cannot serve him." Daniel's voice remained calm but firm. "Then I won't eat either." "But sir—" "No," Daniel interrupted gently. "If you deny him food, then keep the meal. I won't accept it." The manager joined them, clearly annoyed. "We can't have this man inside, sir." Daniel looked straight into his eyes. "He's hungry. And he's a human being. I'm not moving until you let him sit." The cafe grew silent. People watched. Some shook their heads. Some felt ashamed. Some whispered nervously. Minutes passed. And then, something unexpected happened. A young mother with her child stood up from a nearby table. "I'll give up my table," she said. "Let them sit." Another man joined. "Yeah, let them eat. It's just food." People began nodding. The pressure shifted. The manager sighed deeply. "Fine," he said. "You can both sit." Daniel smiled gratefully and guided the homeless man to the table. The old man's eyes filled with tears as he whispered, "Why are you doing this for me?" Daniel replied quietly, "Because someone should." Outside the window, Alexander Stone stood watching. For the first time that morning, the billionaire's expression changed. There was a hint of a smile. Daniel had passed the first real test, but the challenges ahead would be far harder. Daniel finished breakfast with the homeless man, whose name he learned was Mr. Harlan. The old man ate slowly, savoring every bite as if it were the first real meal he'd had in years. Daniel didn't rush him. He just watched quietly, grateful that he could make someone smile today. When they finally stepped outside, Alexander Stone was leaning against his black car, arms crossed, his eyes locked on Daniel. "Why did you do that?" Alexander asked. Daniel blinked. "Do what?" "Sir, refuse to eat unless the homeless man could join you." Daniel shrugged softly. Because he was hungry, and because I would want someone to do the same for me. If I were in his place, Alexander stared at him with a strange expression as if he expected a different answer, something more clever or strategic. But Daniel's answer was simple, honest, human. After a long pause, Alexander said, "Come with me." Daniel hesitated. "What about Mr. Harlan?" Alexander glanced at the old man. "He can go." But Daniel shook his head. "He has nowhere to go." Alexander's jaw tightened, clearly annoyed. "Are you responsible for every stranger on the street?" Daniel replied quietly, "Maybe not, but if I can help someone for even a few minutes in my life, I won't walk away." This time Alexander didn't hide his reaction. His eyes narrowed, studying Daniel like a puzzle he couldn't solve. Finally, he sighed. "Fine. Bring him." They all got into the car, Alexander driving, Daniel beside him, and Mr. Harlan in the back. The homeless man seemed nervous, as if he was inside a world far too clean and expensive for him. "Where are we going?" Daniel asked. "You'll see," Alexander replied. The car drove through one of the wealthiest parts of the city. Mansions, marble driveways, private gardens. They were worlds away from Daniel's reality. After almost 20 minutes, the car stopped in front of a massive iron gate. The gate opened automatically. Inside was a breathtaking estate with a fountain, glass walls, and luxury that made Daniel feel even smaller. Alexander stepped out. "This is my home. Both of you come." Daniel followed, uncertain, while Mr. Harlan seemed almost afraid to touch the ground. Inside, everything sparkled: marble floors, giant paintings, and a staircase that looked like it belonged in a palace. Alexander turned to Daniel. "You want a job, right?" "Yes, sir." "What kind of job would you take?" "Anything," Daniel answered instantly. "Cleaner, driver, assistant, whatever helps me support my daughter." Alexander walked closer. "And what if I told you the job requires more than work?" Daniel frowned. "More than work?" "Yes," Alexander said. "It requires character, strength, and the ability to make difficult choices under pressure." Daniel swallowed. I can try." Alexander nodded once. "Good. Then your test continues." Before Daniel could respond, Alexander snapped his fingers, and a housemaid approached with a tray. On the tray was the same $10 bill that Daniel had given him earlier. Alexander held it up. "This is the last money you had today, wasn't it?" Daniel nodded silently. Alexander placed the bill on the table. "You can take it back right now. No consequences." Or... He paused. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. "Or what?" "Or," Alexander continued, "you can leave it there and choose to trust me completely. If you trust me, your life may change. But if you take it back, everything ends here." Daniel stared at the $10 bill. That small, crumpled note meant groceries. It meant bus fare. It meant a snack for Lily after school. He thought about his daughter's smiling face. He thought about survival. He thought about pride. And then he thought about hope. Slowly, Daniel stepped forward and placed his hand over the bill. Alexander watched sharply. Seconds passed. Finally, Daniel removed his hand and did not take the money. "I trust you," he said softly. Alexander exhaled this time with a real smile. "You passed," he whispered. But Daniel had no idea. Daniel stood silently in Alexander Stone's grand living room, his heart pounding after choosing to trust the billionaire without taking back his last $10. Alexander studied him for a long moment, as if confirming something deep, something invisible. "Good," Alexander finally said. "Let's move to the next step." Mr. Harlan, the homeless man, stood nervously near the door, unsure if he should stay or leave. Daniel glanced at him, giving him a reassuring nod. Alexander walked toward the glass wall overlooking a huge garden and said, "You see, Daniel, most people think money reveals a person's nature, but I believe money exposes people. Pressure exposes people. Making choices when you have nothing exposes people. Daniel listened silently. So now, Alexander said, turning around, I need to see how you handle pressure. Daniel felt a cold shiver. What kind of pressure? Alexander snapped his fingers. A security guard brought forward a sleek black laptop and placed it on the table. Sit, Alexander ordered. Daniel sat slowly. Alexander opened the laptop. A live video feed appeared, a camera pointed at the entrance gate of the estate. Daniel didn't understand until he saw the figure approaching. His heart dropped. It was Lily, his daughter, holding the hand of her school teacher. They were walking toward the gate. Daniel panicked. Why is she here? What did you do? Alexander raised a hand calmly. Relax. I sent a driver to pick her up from school. She is safe. Daniel clenched his fists. You had no right to bring my daughter here without telling me. Alexander's voice remained calm. Your job test is not about comfort. It's about trust. Daniel breathed heavily, trying to steady himself. What do you want from me? Alexander sat in front of him, folding his hands. Simple, he said. When your daughter enters this room, you must not tell her that you're struggling. Daniel froze. What? You must pretend everything is fine, Alexander said. No sadness, no fear, no stress. I want to see if you can protect a child's heart, even when your own heart is breaking. Daniel shook his head. That's not a test. That's cruelty. Alexander leaned closer. No, that's fatherhood. Silence filled the room. Daniel swallowed hard. His voice cracked. She always sees me as strong. If I lie, it's not lying, Alexander interrupted. It's shielding a child. Can you do that, Daniel? Can you smile even when life is crushing you? Daniel looked toward the screen again. Lily was almost at the door now, skipping happily. He suddenly remembered all the nights he cried quietly after she fell asleep. All the days he skipped meals so she could have enough. All the moments he hid tears behind fake smiles so she wouldn't worry. He closed his eyes. He had been doing this test his entire life without even knowing it. A maid entered the room. Sir, the little girl is here? Daniel wiped his face quickly. His heart was shaking, but his smile was ready. The door opened. Daddy. Lily shouted as she ran into his arms. Daniel knelt down and hugged her tightly, breathing in her warmth, her innocence. He held her longer than usual. Lily pulled back. Daddy, this place is so big. Is it your new job? Daniel looked into her glowing eyes. He forced a gentle smile. Maybe, princess, he said softly. Daddy's just talking to a kind man who might help us. Alexander watched sharply, observing every detail. Lily giggled and tugged Daniel's sleeve. Can we live here someday, Daddy? It looks like a fairy tale. Daniel's chest tightened, painfully. He looked at Alexander for a brief second, then back at his daughter. Who knows, Daniel said with a bright smile. Fairy tales sometimes come true. Lily hugged him again. Daniel held her tightly, swallowing the storm inside him. Alexander's expression softened just slightly. Send her to the playroom, Atola maid. Lily waved happily and left the room. Once the door closed, Alexander turned to Daniel. You did well, he said. Very well, but now comes the true breaking point. Daniel's eyes widened. What more do you want from me? Alexander's voice lowered into something cold. Now, I need to know how far you would go for love. Daniel felt a cold wave run through him. Alexander's words echoed in the silent room. Now, I need to know how far you would go for love. Daniel clenched his fists unconsciously. His voice was steady, but his eyes revealed fear. What does that mean? Alexander paced slowly in front of him, hands behind his buckaman, who always controlled every situation. Love, he began, is the most powerful force on earth. Stronger than money, stronger than ambition, stronger than fear. He shot a sharp look at Daniel, and people do anything for it. Sometimes too much. Daniel swallowed. Love isn't something to test, sir. Alexander ignored the comment. To understand you fully, I need to see your limits. He motioned to the security guard. Bring him. Daniel turned toward the door as it opened. 2 guards entered escorting Mr. Harlan, the homeless man he had helped earlier. Daniel stood instantly. What's going on? Why is he here? Mr. Harlan looked scared, hands trembling. I'm sorry, son. They said I had to come. Alexander stepped between them. You helped this man from the goodness of your heart. Admirable. But tell me, would you sacrifice something for him? Daniel frowned. What do you mean? Alexander pointed to a tray on the table. On it sat a contract and a pen. This, Alexander said, tapping the contract, is an official job agreement. Full salary. Medical insurance. A home for you and your daughter. Everything you've been praying for. Daniel's heart jumped. A real job. A home. Stability. Safety. A future. He felt tears forming but. Then Alexander slid the contract away slightly. But if you sign this, he continued slowly, you must agree to one condition. Daniel stiffened. What condition? Alexander looked him straight in the eyes. You must leave Mr. Harlan outside my gate tonight. In the cold, without helping him. Without giving him money, without taking him anywhere. You must walk away. Ainsi fait, doesn't he exist? Daniel's jaw dropped. What? Alexander repeated calmly. If you want this job, you must prove you can choose your own family first. I want to know if you can make the hard choice. The choice every man in this world eventually faces. Protect your child, or protect a stranger. Daniel looked at Mr. Harlan. The old man shook his head frantically. No, no. Don't do this for me, son. I'm used to the cold. I'm used to the streets. You take that job. For your little girl. Don't you dare lose this chance because of me. But Daniel wasn't listening. His world was spinning. Everything he had done, today every test led to this. Sir, Daniel whispered, you can't ask me to abandon a helpless man. Alexander's expression remained stone cold. I can. And I am. Daniel's breathing grew heavy. His mind screamed. His heart ached. His hands shook. He imagined Lily, her smile, her dreams, her small hands holding his. He imagined giving her a warm home, a bed, a kitchen full of food, a safe life. All he needed was to sign that paper. One signature, but he also pictured Mr. Harlan shivering, starving, discarded like trash. And he remembered a time when he himself had nearly been homeless, holding his newborn daughter, begging for help that never came. Tears blurred Daniel's vision. Alexander stepped closer. Choose. The room felt like it was collapsing. Daniel wiped his face, looked at Mr. Harlan, then at the contract, then at the billionaire. No, Daniel whispered. Alexander blinked. What? Daniel stood tall, voice shaking but firm. I won't abandon him. I won't step on someone's suffering just to escape my own. If I start choosing who deserves kindness, then I become the kind of man I never wanted to be. Alexander's jaw tightened. Daniel pushed the contract back across the table. Keep your job. I'll find another way. I want to teach my daughter that success is earned by turning our backs on people who need us. Mr. Harlan covered his face, sobbing. Alexander stared at Daniel, expressing unreadable, eyes burning. For the first time that day, Daniel thought he had failed, but he was wrong. Very wrong. Because that moment, that painful choice, was exactly the decision Alexander had been waiting to see. The room fell silent. Daniel stood trembling, his heart still racing from the decision that had shattered the one chance he thought he had. Mr. Harlan sobbed softly in the corner, and Alexander, stone billionaire, cold, unreadable, simply stared at Daniel like he was seeing him for the first time. Finally, Alexander spoke. "Say that again." Daniel swallowed, but his voice stayed steady. "I won't abandon a man who needs help. Not for money. Not for comfort. Not for anything." Alexander stepped closer, his polished shoes echoing against the marble floor. "You are refusing a home, a full salary, a safe life, for a homeless stranger you've known for only a few hours." Daniel looked at Mr. Harlan, then back at Alexander. Because kindness isn't measured in hours, it's measured in humanity. Alexander's face didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Something Daniel couldn't quite understand. Mr. Harlan wiped his tears. "Son, why would you do this? You have a little girl. She deserves better than all this suffering." Daniel put a hand on the old man's shoulder. "She deserves to grow up knowing her father didn't trade his soul for money." The words echoed through the vast room like a prayer. Then Alexander suddenly turned away, covering his face with a hand. Daniel froze. Was the billionaire shaking? Was he angry? Was he laughing? What was happening? After a long, tense moment, Alexander whispered, "Enough." He turned back around, and Daniel's breath caught. Alexander Stone's eyes were filled with tears. Not anger, not mockery, but something deeper. Something human. Daniel had never seen the billionaire like this. No one had. Alexander stepped toward him slowly. "Do you know," he said softly, "why I test people?" Daniel didn't answer. Alexander looked down, his voice trembling slightly. "Because years ago, I helped a man on the street. I gave him money, food, temporary shelter." He paused. "I trusted him." "What happened?" Daniel asked quietly. Alexander closed his eyes. "He betrayed me, robbed me, hurt my family. Every person I helped after that used me." His voice cracked. "I stopped believing kindness existed without a hidden motive." Daniel's chest tightened. "So this wasn't just a test. This was a man trying to heal a wound," Alexander continued. "I built walls around myself. I trusted no one, and the richer I became." He laughed bitterly. "The more I believed good people didn't exist." He lifted his gaze directly to Daniel. "Until today." Daniel blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Alexander walked to the desk, picked up the contract, and tore it in half. Daniel's heart sank. Had he ruined everything? But then Alexander raised his voice, not cold, but full of emotion. "That contract was fake." Daniel froze. "What?" Alexander smiled genuinely, emotionally, the kind of smile a man gives when he finally finds something he lost long ago. "Every test, every moment, every cruel choice I placed before you was never about the job." Daniel shook his head, breathless. "Then what was it about?" Alexander stepped forward and placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "It was about seeing whether people like you still exist in this world." Daniel stared, stunned. Alexander continued. "I built walls around myself. I trusted no one, and the richer I became." He laughed bitterly. "The more I believed good people didn't exist." He lifted his gaze directly to Daniel. "Until today." Daniel blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Alexander walked to the desk, picked up the contract, and tore it in half. Daniel's heart sank. Had he ruined everything? But then Alexander raised his voice, not cold but full of emotion. "That contract was fake." Daniel froze. "What?" Alexander smiled genuinely, emotionally. The kind of smile a man gives when he finally finds something he lost long ago. Every test, every moment, every cruel choice I placed before you was never about the job. Daniel shook his head, breathless. Then, what was it about? Alexander stepped forward and placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. It was about seeing whether people like you still exist in this world. Daniel stared, stunned. Alexander continued, "You didn't just pass the test, Daniel. You showed me what real integrity looks like. You showed me kindness without fear, sacrifice without hesitation, strength through humility, and most of all, love that protects others even when you are breaking inside." Tears filled Daniel's eyes. "So, what happens now?" Alexander smiled softly. "Now, Daniel, I give you something real." He walked to a drawer and pulled out a new contract official, stamped, thick. "This is a full-time managerial position at Stone Industries. High salary, a home for you and Lily on my estate, full medical care, education, support, everything you need." Daniel gasped, covering his mouth. Mr. Harlan cried openly. Alexander walked to him too. "And for you, a place to stay, food, clothes, a second chance." The old man broke down, thanking him again and again. Daniel whispered, "Why? Why give us so much?" Alexander looked at him with the warmest eyes Daniel had ever seen. "Because he reminded me of something I forgot a long time ago, that real wealth is not measured in money, but in humanity." Daniel's legs collapsed as he hugged Alexander tightly, tears pouring out. Lily ran into the room moments later and saw her father crying. "Daddy? What happened?" Daniel lifted her into his arms, smiling through tears. "Fairy tales do come true, princess." And in that moment, in a billionaire's mansion, in the arms of his daughter, surrounded by people whose lives had just changed, Daniel finally understood.